I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the World Community for Christian Meditation and the John Main Center for Meditation and Interreligious Dialogue here at Georgetown. My name is Dennis McAuliffe, and I'm Special Assistant to President of Georgetown, Jack DeGioia. And we are welcoming two very important sponsors from the World Community. In addition to the Center for Meditation, we also have the Meditatio Outreach Movement. And our co-sponsors this evening are the Business School and the Berkeley Center. And I'd like to ask Reena Agarwal from the Business School to say a word.
Thank you, Dennis. And I'd like to welcome all of you on behalf of the McDonough School and the Center for Financial Markets and Policy. This is really a very interesting time to be having a dialogue on leadership. There is so much going on in this global economy, and certainly one of the things is lack of leadership. So we are very fortunate to have this panel and very, very well qualified speakers to give their own personal aspect of leadership and what works for them. Here at the McDonough School, we are always talking to our students about responsible leadership and how they need to be global leaders and responsible leaders. So we have a lot to learn from our speakers today. I'd like to thank them for coming and welcome all of you this evening for this very exciting conversation that we are going to have. And with that, I'm going to give it to Tom Bancha from the Berkeley Center.
Thank you, Reena. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you all for coming. Tom Banchoff, Director of the Berkeley Center, one of the sponsors of tonight's event. Just a word about the center. We're located in the office of President DeGioia, a university-wide center dedicated to the study of religion as it intersects with the global issues of our day, politics, society, culture, but also economics. And I also look forward to this discussion about the world of business from the perspective of leaders and their efforts to connect their personal values and experiences with their leadership in the global economy. So thank you for being here.
Thank you to our very generous sponsors. And we'd like to start with Peter Ng's talk. Peter is with the Singapore Government Investment Company, and we would like to ask him to say a few words. Thank you.
Friends, ladies and gentlemen, Sean Hagan and I are members of the World Community for Christian Meditation. And this event is called a Meditatio Forum. Meditatio. And Meditatio is the outreach of our community through which we hope to share the fruits of meditation with the wider world in responding to the crises and challenges of our time. We feel that the practice of meditation can make a contribution to areas such as business and finance, policy making, care for the environment, the education of children and youth, care for the sick and dying, helping people in recovery from addiction. These are the areas that we hope as a community to make a contribution. And we feel that this contribution can best be made by encouraging everyone that was interested to hear our message that they should embark on this personal journey of meditation. So we'd like to put before you this evening the proposition that a regular practice of meditation can add considerable depth and meaning to our lives. And it is a conviction of our community that a contemplative practice, such as meditation, is vital for the wholeness of the human person. As meditation transforms us at depth, at the personal level, we can then contribute to a better world through our work and relationships. And in this way, the practice of meditation can make for enlightened leadership. I myself have been meditating for 23 years. My teacher is the person sitting next to me, Father Lawrence Freeman. At a certain point in my life, my wife and I were searching for a way of prayer, a spiritual practice that will deepen our spiritual life. And my wife, Patricia, who passed away 7 years ago now, she stumbled upon a book written by Lawrence Freeman called The Light Within. She read the book. She called me in my office immediately and said, "Peter, I found what we are looking for, and it is contained in this book." And that was how my journey began. Meditating with my wife Patricia, with her encouragement, initially with a lot of nagging. So my practice of meditation involves setting aside 25 minutes every morning and every evening. And during those 2 periods of daily meditation, I sit still with my spine upright. And I try to bring the mind to stillness by the continuous and interior repetition of a prayer word or a mantra. I say try because it is a ceaseless, perpetual struggle. But when the restless and distracted mind conjures up any thoughts, ideas, plans, worries, fantasies, I've been trained by the discipline to let them go. And the way to let them go is to return repeatedly. Simple recitation of the mantra, sounding the mantra, and listening to it. So it is a radically simple practice. And it can be summed up in 3 very simple instructions. Meditate every morning and every evening. Bring the body to stillness by sitting still. Bring the mind to stillness by saying the mantra. But like a lot of things in life, what is simple is not necessarily easy. In fact, meditation makes considerable demands on the practitioner. In the first place, it makes a demand for all of us in a very busy lifestyle to make the time every morning and evening for the meditation. And then, during the period of meditation itself, to be content just to repeat the mantra, letting go of all thoughts and ideas. So it is a considerable discipline, but I have discovered that it is in the acceptance of discipline that we come to a certain freedom, an inner freedom. Recently, I had the privilege of sharing the practice of meditation with the founder father of Singapore, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. He heard that I was practicing meditation, so he asked me whether I could share my practice with him, which I did by going to his office. And I explained to him, just as I did just now, the simple practice. And then I said the best way for us to learn is to do it together. And it has been about 16 months since we started. And 2 weeks ago, when I last saw him, after some business discussion about the affairs of our company, the Government Investment Corporation, he turned to me and said, you know, I've been meditating regularly every evening, and I'm now starting on my morning meditation. So I said, I have shared this gift of meditation with many people, but you are possibly my best student. And I said, I'm enormously impressed by the discipline that you brought to bear on this. And he says, well, if something is worthwhile doing, you put your heart into it and you accept the discipline. And I said, yeah, but for you to have embraced the discipline so quickly, you know, it's very inspiring. He looked at me in the eye and said, Kok Song, that's what he calls me, my Chinese name. He says, if I am not this disciplined, Singapore would not be where it is today. So, I mean, that tells you that something which is very worthwhile in life is worth investing our time and effort. And the wholeness of the human person, I think, is perhaps one of the most important experiences for us to come to. I speak to you from the Christian contemplative tradition, drawing in particular from the teaching of the Benedictine monk John Main, who was Lawrence Freeman's own teacher, who passed away in 1982. But it's important for us in this forum to remember that meditation is a universal spiritual practice, which can be found in all the major world religions. And many people, in fact, practice meditation in a secular context. So because of its universality, meditation offers the potential to draw together people of different or no religious beliefs, and can enable all sincere seekers of peace to meet in silence on the common ground of humanity. Our world is in great need of a transformation of consciousness. Our world is ravaged by ethnic conflict, violence, terrorism. Our natural environment is being desecrated. There is much human suffering arising from poverty, extreme income disparity, and severe unemployment. The global economy is in a sorry state. We have not repaired the damage caused by the 2008 financial crisis. And already the global economy is teetering on the brink of another crisis. We are 20 million jobs short of restoring employment to 2008 levels. And this unemployment situation will worsen if the global economy relapses into recession. So at a time when global problems of such seriousness require leadership of the highest order, we find that political leaders and policymakers are largely impotent. Political leaders lack the courage to put hard truths to their constituents and to eschew short-term politics for sensible long-term policies. On both sides of the Atlantic, political leaders persist in kicking the can down the road. No wonder there has been a collapse of confidence and the loss of faith in political leaders. Our event here today at Georgetown University is a collaboration between the John Main Center, the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace and World Affairs, and the McDonald School of Business. This Business of Spirit seminar is an excellent follow-up to your earlier initiative from Georgetown called Faith and the Global Agenda, Values for the Post-Crisis Economy. That initiative, Faith and the Global Agenda, sought to fundamentally rethink the moral framework that underpins our economy, politics, and interconnectedness. What emerged from Faith and the Global Agenda was a strong sense that a change of values was desperately needed, and that faith can play a key role in articulating those values. But in talking about faith, we should realize that faith is not synonymous with religious belief. It is possible to create a community of faith among people of different beliefs. Because the faith that we are talking about is a faith in the intrinsic goodness of the human person, created in the image of God. With this faith, we can develop a sense of community and solidarity, so that self-interest and greed do not ride roughshod over the common good. But for the change of values to happen, we need to go to the depth of the human person, where one's perception of the world is shaped and where the motivation for action and external behavior arises. The teacher of our community, John Main, points out that at the center of every human being, there's the principle of unity, peace, and harmony. And to meditate is to journey to the center of our being and to live out of the center of our being. And John Main put it in the following words. He said, "We live in a world that makes great demands on us and is continually threatening our ability to stay rooted in the center of our being. Meditation is the way to rootedness in ourselves. If we live at the surface level of activities, our lives will degenerate into a search for security or ways of self-protection. Jesus tells us that only God is good. In other words, God is all goodness, transcending all human ideas of the good. And the wonder of meditation, the wonder of prayer, is that when we transcend ourselves, we enter God's all goodness, and we become good ourselves. Not because of any kind of striving to be good, but because we enter the radiance of the orbit of His goodness. That is the basis of all morality. Not that we try to imitate God, but that we participate in the goodness of God. Every time we sit down to meditate, we enter into a state of oneness where the whole of our being comes together in the presence of God. In saying the mantra, we are doing the work of attention. But this attention is a selfless attention. It is an act of other-centeredness. But in that other-centeredness, we transcend ourselves, and so we are entirely open to God. In that way, everything in our life becomes aligned on God, and our order of values is gradually changed. Instead of our value system being based on the ego, on personal success, self-promotion, self-preservation, our value system becomes based on God. We see the greater reality of other-centered values such as compassion, tolerance, forgiveness, and justice. All of us would presumably like to be more kind, more selfless, more compassionate, and so on. But at the same time, we recognize ourselves as weak, mortal, fallible human beings. And this often induces us to protect our own vulnerability. But in meditation, we discover the power source that enables us to live without the anxiety of having to protect ourselves. The ultimate goal of all religion is a relinking. And the relinking is a relinking with our own center. In our own center, in the depths of our own spirit, dwells the Spirit of God. But what has severed our link with the Spirit within us is our egoism, our self-preoccupation, our self-centeredness. We are perennially thinking about our surface selves. We are locked into the prison of our egoistic self. So the domination of the ego poses the greatest challenge to us in coming to wholeness and to good management and leadership. Fear and greed are at the root of our present crisis, and they are the manifestations of an inflamed, dysfunctional ego. But the ego is part and parcel of being human. We all need the energy of the ego to propel us into action. We hope that our ego can develop in a healthy way, and that we can even transcend the ego so that our true self is not obscured by the false self, which is the ego. But the power of meditation lies in the fact that in order to break out of the prison of our ego, we need not force, but gentleness. Therein lies the efficacy of the way of meditation, which is the way of gentleness. And this is how John Min described it. He says, we cannot vanquish the ego by force. That would itself be egotistical. We cannot use force because force would be a self-directed exercise of the will. So to escape from self-obsession, we have to change the direction of our attention. We have to turn the light around, away from ourselves. So in other words, the only way to transcend the ego is to ignore it. The way of meditation is a way of dying and a way of living. While you're saying the mantra, you are dying to what is probably the most difficult thing in the world for us to die to. We die to our egoism, to our own self-centeredness as we move beyond our self-consciousness. And the reason is that while you're saying the mantra, you are not thinking about yourself, you are attending to the mantra. So as we die to the ego, we rise to a way of life that astonishes us with its infinite richness. Meditation is a healing process. What is healed is the wound of our divided self that separates us from others, from God, and so from our own full potential. The world is in need of enlightened leadership. Enlightenment is one of the words often used to describe meditation. We meditate to become enlightened. There's much darkness in our world. We hear every day of terrible injustices, of violence, hatred, feuds, greed, and insane destructiveness. This happens at both the personal and the political level. Not many of us are aware that we do have a dark side. And meditation is the process whereby we come into the light. The purpose of the coming of Christ is described in the Gospel of John as being to banish the darkness. Christ's personal light is so great that the darkness cannot overcome it. And Jesus tells us that the power that enlightens us is the power of love. In the Christian vision of life, the potential for the development of our human consciousness has been radically transformed by the incarnation. The life, teaching, death, and resurrection of Jesus, and by his sending his Spirit to dwell in our hearts. By the indwelling of his Spirit within us, Jesus has brought the divine within the ambience of every man and woman alive. The incarnation has made possible the potential divinization of the human being. God became man so that we might become God. Mahatma Gandhi saw the Jesus event as a universal truth. He said, because the life of Jesus has a significance and the transcendency to which I have alluded, I believe that Jesus Christ belongs not solely to Christianity, but to the entire world, to all races and people. It matters little under what flag, name, or doctrine they may work, profess a faith, or worship a God inherited from their ancestors. Let us return to the theme of enlightened leadership. It seems to me that the transcending of the ego is the link between meditation and enlightened leadership. We are all familiar with what are commonly regarded as the attributes of good leadership. Let me review with you 5 of these leadership qualities that I think are the most significant, and share with you from my own experience how they are related to the practice of meditation. The first attribute of leadership is the will to lead. The will to lead. When this is positively express, the leader views leadership as the acceptance of responsibility and not simply the exercise of power. But when the will to lead degenerates, the leader operates from an egocentric need for self-glorification and self-enrichment. How does meditation help in this? Well, in meditation, as I said earlier on, we cultivate the discipline of selfless attention, in which our focus is directed away from ourselves to the other. The second attribute of leadership is clarity of mind. Now, clarity of mind is not to be confused with intelligence, because something more than IQ is needed. And that something is sound judgment, which requires emotional awareness and emotional control. A critical part of clarity is the acceptance and the recognition of uncertainty and the admission of ignorance. From my own experience, meditation enables me to see more clearly, perhaps with the eye of the heart, to look into what is essential and enduring, unclouded by the illusion of the ego. The third attribute of leadership is the humility and the ability to learn. And the ability to learn enables the leader to expand his perception beyond past positions and to adapt to changing circumstances. Some leaders stop learning when they become overconfident as a result of success or the admiration or flattery from others. The leader must learn from his experience, and the most effective source of learning is from errors. Learning is inhibited when the leader fears making errors, or worse still, denies his errors. So self-knowledge and true humility is needed for true learning. Meditation is the way to self-knowledge. When we meditate, only a little experience with our distracted mind would be a cause for humility. But at the same time, the faithful return to the mantra in the face of distractions builds up our endurance to persevere in our learning to be attentive. The fourth attribute that I would like to talk about is the leader's experience and insight. And his leadership role requires a certain measure of solitude and aloneness. While he must share and respect the core values and the aspirations of his group, sometimes he also has to be an agent of change. There comes a time when he has to lead his people along a new path and to make hard decisions that are not popular but necessary for the group's progress. In meditation, we enter into the practice of solitude, in which the experience of our uniqueness within a wider plan, within the cosmic plan, you might say, prepares us better for contributing in our own unique way to the community. And lastly, the leader needs to deploy his energy wisely. The wise deployment of energy refers to the economy of energy, the direction of energy, and the impact of the dynamic leader on the energies of his followers. We are all mindful of how the pressure of time and an unrelenting pace of work can cause stress and friction at home and at work. Wise leaders operate with the optimum deployment of energy, their own and their followers. In meditation, we put the priority of being over action, so that right action can proceed from the goodness to be found in pure being. I myself have found that the twice daily meditation periods are essential to a sense of well-being and balanced growth. On very busy days, the 2 meditation periods reset the interior balance. So to summarize, meditation is the work of selfless attention. In the turning from self to the other, from self-preoccupation to other-centeredness, the enlightened leader sees the exercise of leadership as not about himself, but for the common good of others. Keeping this balance between individual and common good was once the job of society and religion. Today it must be underpinned by a personal practice and the sense of community which meditation nurtures. If meditation has the potential to transform the human being, we should ask, should this life skill not be taught in schools and universities? If meditation can make a difference to the quality of leadership, should this discipline not be offered in the curriculum of business schools? In teaching the science and art of management, should we not be equally concerned, if not more concerned, with the management of self? It seems far-fetched to propose that a discipline as simple as meditation can make a significant contribution to the practice of leadership. I speak from my own experience, and it has been my experience that meditation is possibly the kindest thing that we should do for ourselves. But the paradox is, it is also the kindest thing we can do for others. Thank you.
To give a response from his perspective as a professor.
Thank you, Dennis. And thank you, Rena, for inviting me to this occasion to share my thoughts. And thank you, Peter. I mean, going after Peter to give any kind of response is going to be a tough task. Right? He has already covered all the aspects of the points or all the aspects of meditation and leadership that I was going to talk about. So I'm going to share my thoughts on those, elaborating on some of the ideas that I've had for some time. So this meeting is about leadership and about meditation. And when I think about a person who's a leader, I think about, for example, Benjamin Franklin. The name comes to me because I lived in Philadelphia for many years. And I think about other presidents of this country. I think about going back to my own homeland, going back to the religious traditions, Hinduism, Buddhism, and most of you don't know much about. My last name is actually a name that comes from a religion that is similar to Buddhism and Hinduism. And then going further, skipping many people, with no due respect to them, Mahatma Gandhi. Then coming back full circle, Martin Luther King in this country. All these great leaders, I think there is unanimity in our fields and others that these are great leaders. So I think about what are the common characteristics across these disciplines, people who have been great leaders in society, maybe in sciences, and definitely coming back to my field, the CEOs. For example, the two people I have studied deeply, Stephen Jobs, who unfortunately recently passed away, and I talk about him in my class, and I tell, this guy is so far above what I can think of that I won't even want to talk about him. So I have to lower my expectation to another person who's a great leader, is Warren Buffett. And I wrote a book about him. I studied investments for 20 years or so. And what are common features? Then my world has been mostly about universities. I think about the deans, the presidents, because I can actually learn something from them because they're right there. So what have I learned? And what have I thought about, and how do I communicate with meditation? Because I grew up in a family that always meditated. The Jain community meditates, like the Buddhist community. And then subsequently, many, many years later, I came back full circle and started meditating in the manner Peter described. I try to go only every morning, not every evening. But still, I try to do that. And that has transformed my thinking about many subjects. I want to share those with you. So what is so great about Stephen Jobs and Warren Buffett, for example, and other common features across leaders? So this might come to a surprise to you. In the tradition in which meditators, at least in the East, talk about the people who meditate, and this is a surprise, probably a paradoxical one, do a lot for themselves. The first stage in meditation is you do a lot for yourself. That is what leaders do. They do a lot for themselves. And sometimes it's money, in the case of CEOs, sometimes in just accomplishing what they wanted to do for themselves, maybe for the families, maybe for something else. But the second aspect is much more interesting. The second aspect of great leaders is that they do a lot for the societies, not only to themselves, not only for themselves. And there is not that much difference between what they do for themselves and what they do for society. And that's the beauty of great leadership. For example, if you go back to Stephen Jobs, he went to India when he was 17 or 18 years of age in search of enlightenment. He spent a year there, or approximately a year, came back totally discouraged. But he kept seeking what he was all about, as Peter pointed out, in inner heart and goodness of human mind, goodness of humankind. Kept searching, and ultimately found what he wanted to be, and he pursued those values throughout his life. That's a sign of a good leadership. And he wanted to do those for himself, the enlightenment, which he probably didn't get. He got converted to, not converted, at least he was married in the Buddhist tradition. He was born as a Christian, went to India in search of Hinduism to give him salvation, but he didn't get that. Converted to Buddhism and searched for, and probably was a good practitioner of meditation. In the case of Warren Buffett, whom I've studied a little more deeply, he did the same thing. Childhood, he wanted to know what his values were. And his father gave him all the values that he actually followed for the rest of his life. It wasn't the money that he actually was looking for. He was looking for the challenges. And he lives in the same house that he bought in the 1950s and lives a simple life. But what he has done for the society, what Stephen Jobs have done for the society, the values they actually learned early part of their lives, they carried them through. And there comes the meditation part. So in meditation, what do we do? As Peter described, what do? We sit, and we sit, and we sit in many cases. That's the first part of meditation. In the sense we learn to concentrate. That's the idea behind, at least the way I was taught. And it does help you. And when I was taught that first time, I said, why is that very important? He said, think about your mind. How many seconds can you actually concentrate on anything? I said, not very many seconds. In 1 minute, I'm going to India and come back. So they said, well, if you can control this big elephant that you have, even with this little control of mind, you can do so many wonderful things. Think about the situation when you can really control this mind half as much as you want to be. This will be a great asset. So the meditation helps you to concentrate and develop your skill so that you can learn very fast. And that's a simple thing which I think without any kind of religious involvement or anything else is an important part of meditation, just that. It's an exercise of the mind, just like we go to the gym and exercise our muscles. We have to do every day. As Peter pointed out, it is easy or simple or neither. In my case, it's neither. Okay. You have to exercise every day. You have to have a discipline, and then only your mind will listen to you what you want it to listen to. Otherwise, your mind is wandering all the time. The second level of meditation is then you get to know yourself, who you really are after some time. And that might take years. And I would like to borrow 2 words which I thought were the best spoken words in any language. Plato gave it the popular name, popularized it, know thyself. And once you get to know yourself, you get to know the world, because only through your prism you can see the world. So that's the second stage of meditation. So when I talked about Steve Jobs and Warren Buffett, I think these great leaders are at that level at the very least. In the sense they know the world, they know themselves, they don't deviate from this stimulus today, and that stimulus tomorrow. They keep doing what they really want to do. In the early 2000s, when the tech bubble was going through, I know what Warren Buffett did. Most of you know. He said, I don't care. This is what, I don't understand these things. I'm not going to go there. And same things I tell my students too. So in that sense, meditation basically helps leaders to know themselves, and then they will not deviate from the path they have chosen. And as Peter pointed out, in the end, if you meditate and think about yourself and think about the world, you're going to choose the path that is the kind path, human path. You're not going to choose a path that is somewhat destructive to the world. So in that sense, if you meditate, you're going to be a great leader. So I can go on and on, but my time is limited, and I want to be short. So I just want to explain with a couple of little examples. So this year, I was teaching accounting, and in the summer it so happened, I read something about meditation at the Columbia Business School. I talked to the professor who wanted to start a course or something like that in Columbia, talked to him. And Peter just pointed out that universities should do that, and I totally agree with him. I mean, this is such a wonderful thing if you can increase people's potential to learn and improve the mind. That's the basic idea there. And so this year I teach class in a room similar to this, exactly similar to this. For 4 sections, I had them meditate once. I tell you, this was not a good experience for me. In any case, and my students love me. My students like me a lot. And, but
point out Professor Jain was just elected professor of the module. So his students really love him.
Thank you, Reena. Students sort of didn't rebel at least, right? So, but it was a good experience. But I want to share with you what meditative practices have done to me as a teacher to some extent. I've not reached the level of enlightenment, which is the 3rd or 4th level. We just talked about 2 levels, where you get to know yourself and get to know the world. And then there are levels beyond that. When you get to know oneness you talked about, and so on and so forth. So, sometimes when I will be talking to my students, the room full just like this, and I'll be talking, they will be paying attention to me, I'll be paying attention to them, and I feel that what I'm going to speak they already know, and they're already asking me the question that I need to speak next. So there's a communication going on without anybody speaking a word. And then the trance is over in about a minute or 2. We go back to the reality, and I say, oh God, that was a great meditative experience. Because you really feel oneness with the community. You're totally with them. You're not thinking about yourself separately from the students. And that was the great leaders I was talking to you about earlier. So extend that argument with the leaders. The great leaders are those, in my mind, to go back to the original argument, are the ones where the followers are following the leader, but the followers think the leader is doing what the followers want. And the leader thinks that the followers are following the leader. So it's a unified approach in which we are all together. And I think meditation helps people to think that way, because if you go to the second or third level of meditation, your world is with you. You never think negatively about other people. And that's what we want our future leaders to be like. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prem. And now I'd like to ask Father Lawrence Freeman to talk a little bit about the practice, or to actually practice the practice of meditation.
Mike, shall I use this? Thank you very much. I will suggest that we begin by standing up. Have a little stretch. The reason for this is I'd like to invite you to experience the meditation. And we've heard already in the first two presentations, and we will hear, I'm sure, after the meditation now, that meditation is a very personal experience. That you've heard very open, quite courageous, very frank, very, very personal, moving experiences of the importance of meditation in Peter's life, in Prem's awareness. And if we're to understand that and ground it, then I think it's very helpful that we have our own personal experience of it now. So one of the most obvious things about meditation is that it brings us from the mind, out of the head, out of our distractions, out of just a conceptual way of being, into some deeper level of consciousness. And the universal symbol for this is the heart. So let's just take a moment to allow the body, the mind, and the heart to come together in a restful and a stress-free way. That's one of the ways we can understand stress, is the imagined distance between body and mind that we fall into when we're too busy, when we talk too much, or when we worry too much. So just take a moment to gather ourselves, and to allow the body to be a kind of anchor to the mind. The body is always in the present moment. Therefore, the body never tells a lie. We can always trust what the body says if we listen to it. The mind is very rarely in the present moment. The mind is always thinking about what we've just done or what's going to happen in the future. So just to take a few moments to allow the body and the mind to come together is the best preparation for any period of meditation. Okay, let's sit down. As we've already heard, there are two approaches to meditation, which is a very simple practice, universal wisdom within humanity. And there are many different ways of approaching meditation. In recent years, meditation has become mainstream. We've heard about it in the media. Even the Guardian newspaper, usually not the most religious of English newspapers, published a little booklet on 10 essential principles of meditation. So I would say meditation has broken in to the secular world, and indeed many people will come to meditation primarily through a secular approach, and looking for certain benefits. And the benefits of meditation are well proven. For 50 years or so, the research into meditation shows that it has psychological and physical benefits. It will reduce stress, it improves your blood pressure, it reduces your cholesterol, it helps you deal with chronic pain, it will give you a better chance of recovering from cancer treatment. My own limited contribution to this research is to prove conclusively that meditation does not restore your hair. But negative discoveries are also valuable. So the physical benefits of meditation, improving your sleeping patterns at night and so on, all of these, boosting your immune system, all of these are well proven, and you may come to meditation simply for one or more of these benefits. And if you go to a doctor and you say, look, I'm suffering a lot of anxiety, I get pains in my chest, I can't sleep at night, I get panic attacks, what can you give me something for it? The doctor may well say, well, I could give you some pills, or maybe you ought to look at your lifestyle, and have you ever thought about meditation? So you're more likely today, actually, to be introduced to meditation by a physician or a psychologist than you are by a priest. It's an interesting phenomenon because, of course, meditation comes to us through all the great religious, spiritual traditions. Anyway, I don't think that is a weakness. I think it's an interesting development of something that is universally valuable. However, once your blood pressure is under control and your cholesterol is doing well and so on, then maybe you will be able to look at your life in terms of deeper and more subtle qualities. And so the fruits of meditation, the spiritual fruits of meditation, become more meaningful to you. And St. Paul describes these as love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. And at the end of the day, or the end of our life, it is probably through these qualities that we will feel the value of our lives of being judged. How loving have I been? Have I found joy within myself, or have I always been seeking it just outside of myself? Am I an impossibly angry person, or have I learned to be patient, and so on? So, the important thing, I think, is to realize that whatever is our original motivation for coming to meditation, the practice itself is life-giving and life-enhancing, and why Peter speaks of it as a life skill. And our own community work in teaching meditation to children in schools, many parts of the world, has been one of the great joys and blessings of my life, is to see how simply, naturally, beautifully children take to meditation. We have a huge responsibility to children. The kind of world we're creating for them is a real worry. And yet, although it is our responsibility to teach the young, we should never forget that they teach us. And we can learn from their response to the practice just how important this simplicity can be for our own recovery. And as Peter says in a memorable phrase, the management of self. So, our motivation may be very different. We may be coming to it from different traditions or different perspectives. But the practice itself is what is universal, and therefore has this extraordinary capacity, although meditation is very ordinary, it has this extraordinary capacity to create unity, to reveal the common ground, to make us capable of a friendship, a deep friendship with people with whom we may have many differences. I've been reflecting recently quite a lot on the difference between faith and belief. And faith, it seems to me, is what is universal. It is our capacity for transcendence, it's our capacity for commitment, our capacity for love. So we speak about a faithful marriage or a faithful relationship. And belief is part of a belief system. We have different belief systems. We may change our belief systems over time. We may become fanatical about them. We may become intolerant about other people's belief systems, or we may learn from them. Belief systems are important because they articulate our values, but it is faith, the energy of faith. Jesus says it is your faith that heals you. It's faith, really, I think, that we need to concentrate on in the modern crisis we're facing. Faith has the capacity to heal, to restore, to animate, to re-energize, to renew. Therefore, it is possible to create a community of faith even among people of very different beliefs. And that surely is the challenge of the modern world, to create a community among people of great diversity. Meditation is a way of pure faith. However you're coming at it, with whatever belief system, with whatever motivation, meditation itself is undiluted, 100% faith. So I'd like to introduce you to simply the way I would teach a class of 6-year-olds how we meditate, or the way I taught my class here at Georgetown a few years ago when I was first here to teach. And I discovered that to begin the class with meditation was one of the best things I could do. It was a good way of getting all the students to arrive on time, because they like to meditate. And at the end of the course, they all agreed that the meditation was the best part of the course, which was very humbling for me as a professor here. But very enjoyable to discover as a monk that, in fact, they were getting it. So let me describe to you how we teach meditation. I'm not saying this is the only way to do it or that it's the best way to do it. I can only say this is the way that we do it and the way we teach it, and it has brought us here this evening because of its efficacy and its value. So the first thing we want to do is to get the body into the game. So take a moment to sit upright with your back straight. The posture of your body, of course, is a sort of a sign or an expression of the state of your mind. So if your body is alert, upright and relaxed, then your mind will be more likely to come into that posture as well. Your feet on the ground, your hands on your lap or on your knees. Close your eyes lightly. Relax your shoulders. Relax the muscles of your face. And breathe normally. Meditation is not primarily about a technique. It's about a gentle, faithful practice or discipline. It's the discipline of leaving thoughts, words, imagination behind for a while and allowing the center of consciousness to awaken at a deeper level that we call the heart. We don't have to think about this or what it means. We don't have to imagine it. This is the great gift of children, that they just do it. But we have to follow some kind of focus of attention that will allow us to take the attention off our thoughts, off our thinking about what we're going to do later this evening or tomorrow, or solving our problems. And we do this by taking a single word or a short phrase, a mantra, a sacred word, a prayer phrase, and staying with the same word, we repeat it silently in our mind, in our heart, giving it our undivided attention. And when the mind wanders, which of course it does, we simply return humbly without judging ourselves, evaluating ourselves, and above all, perhaps for success-oriented people, we have to learn to let go of the idea of failure. If we can let go of that idea, then the practice of meditation becomes much easier, and the simplicity of it becomes more evident. So let go of any idea or self-judgment of failure. When you find yourself evaluating yourself, that is another distraction. Choosing the word is important because you want to stay with the same word all the way. It's natural to take a word that is sacred in your own tradition. The word we recommend normally is the word Maranatha. It has a universal currency. It means come Lord. But remember, we're not thinking or imagining anything about the meaning of the word as we say it. We're entering into what Jesus calls poverty of spirit. So let go of thoughts, even good thoughts. If during the meditation you get a wonderful insight and a solution to some major economic crisis, then for the time of the meditation, at least leave that insight to one side and hope that it's there when you come out of the meditation. This is the simple discipline. It's a discipline of renunciation in order to gain a deeper treasure, the treasure hidden within the field of our heart. If you choose the word Maranatha, say it as 4 syllables of equal length. Ma-ra-na-tha. Maranatha. I'd suggest you don't visualize it, but just sound it gently, faithfully, and with attention. Don't use too much force, but say it faithfully. With practice, you'll find your own rhythm, and you'll be setting the word free in your heart. So let's practice that for a few minutes. Again, sit upright. Try and sit as still as you can, because the stillness of body will help to bring you to a stillness of mind. Breathe normally. Close your eyes lightly, and silently, in your mind, your heart, begin to say your word. The word again, I'd suggest, is Maranatha. Ma-ra-na-tha.
Dean David Thomas, Dean of the McDonough School of Business. Thank you.
Thank you. I apologize. I was supposed to go last, but turns out that I have to catch a train. And we thought that we'd be a little further in the program. But this has been, I started some notes here, and I was thinking about what I would say, and I had written down. This has been a pleasure, and that's so underestimated what this has been, just these few moments, these few minutes here. But also I had the pleasure earlier this morning of having Sean and Lawrence and Peter, as well as a number of other individuals who've been involved in this meditation work and movement. And the conversation that they posed to me was this question of, does meditation have a role in the education and development of leaders? And I don't know how many of you know, but I started at Georgetown August 1. I've been in the business of management education, if I count my doctoral studies, for 30 years. And I've never had a moment that so provoked me to think at the edge of my assumptions about how do we develop leaders for the world, as I have today, prompted by these conversations, prompted by, I think, what you'll hear from Sean, who talked to me this morning about the connection between his meditation and how he leads. And I started a conversation with them that I know will continue, and that conversation is about how do we bring this understanding of leadership and this note. We've been focused on developing leaders from the outside in. And what my exposure here makes me think about is the need to develop leaders from the inside out. And meditation and contemplation as the tools for that work. So that's a commitment that made me realize perhaps what the real work is for me to do at Georgetown in my tenure as a dean here. Which is actually, I realize, much deeper than, I sort of came with the ego, which was I could make Georgetown the #1 business school in the world. And I realized that this has made me think about, how do we make this the most profound experience for developing leaders for the world? And if being the #1 business school in the world comes with that, that'll be great. I do have my moments of loving my ego. But if I can do that and not be the #1 business school in the world as seen by Business Week, but be the business school with the most profound educational experience that transforms and develops people into leaders who can use their business skills and pursue the goals of business while also being in service to business and society. So this has just been a profound gift for me personally. And I hate the fact that I have to leave, but thank you.
Thank you very much, Dean Thomas.
Thank you.
And now we have Sean Hagan, General Counsel of the IMF.
Thank you, Dennis. The title of my remarks tonight is Contemplation and Action, which sounds rather philosophical, but actually what I'm going to be talking about is very practical and even mundane, which is how the practice of meditation has made me a better manager and a better decision maker. Now, in this town, you are all used to having lawyers give qualifications to whatever they say. And I'm afraid that I'm going to do the same before I get going. The first is that I'm going to be focusing on the impact of meditation in my own professional life. And it is very much a personal perspective. And I realize that while some aspects of my own experience I think will be of general relevance, I'm also aware that other aspects will not be. The IMF has its own particular characteristics and aspects of leadership that may be valued in the fund as a public institution may not necessarily be cherished elsewhere, including in the private sector. My remarks will also be personal in another sense, which is that the areas where I've experienced the greatest sense of growth and where I will focus tonight are, by implication, the areas where growth was sorely needed. And we all in this room have our own sets of strengths and weaknesses. My second qualification is that this is all very much a work in progress for me. None of the benefits that I'm going to describe should be understood as suggesting that I have arrived at a point where I have mastered all aspects of my professional and my personal life. As we all know and has been described by Lawrence and by Peter, it's a journey. And like all journeys, we get lost. Sometimes we just stop moving. And meditation brings moments of extraordinary insight for me into my own personal and professional life. But I have to recognize that after 50 years of habits, well-grooved behavioral patterns, including impatience, irritability, they're not sanded over quickly. And I invariably resort to some of my less desirable habits. But there are periods of growth, and the key is to develop the discipline of daily practice that sustains that growth and overcomes the setbacks. The final and perhaps most important qualification that I want to give is that it is important to distinguish between motivation and benefits. Notwithstanding all the professional benefits that I'm going to describe, I did not start meditating because of these benefits. My motivation comes and came from a need to deepen my spiritual dimension in my own life. And that is why I meditate within the Christian tradition developed by John Main. Okay. But the fact that the professional benefits are a byproduct rather than a motivation shouldn't be understood as undermining or diminishing the value of these benefits for me or by extension for others. Because of the perspective that I gain from my daily practice, work has actually become a very important vehicle for me to chip away at the very large rock in the middle of the road that impedes my own spiritual journey. And that rock, of course, is the ego. It's also helped me approach work as an expression of service. And as Peter has so eloquently said, meditation has been kind to me, and by extension, I think it has been kind to others. So let me proceed to identify some of the benefits that I have experienced as a result of meditation. The first, and perhaps the most practical benefit, is what John Main describes as the development of the spirit of attention. Now, for those who meditate, and as you have just experienced, hopefully, and no matter what the tradition, the objective is to enter fully into the present moment, with the repetition of the mantra being the vehicle for doing so. And I have found that this spirit of attention, if cultivated, can be an enormous benefit for the entire day. The typical day for an executive starts with a list of things to be done. And invariably, as the day progresses, nothing on that list gets done. Crises occur, meetings are called, and meetings are interrupted with new crises. In fact, the list gets longer, and it is easy, at least for me, to enter into a state somewhere between quiet desperation and panic. Like a machine that is asked too much of it, the mind literally seizes up. By trying to focus on everything, one cannot focus on anything. And by cultivating a spirit of attention, dealing with a multitude of problems actually becomes easier. Instead of focusing on all of the things that need to be done and that haven't been done, that haven't been looked at, you actually just learn to shut all of that out and to just focus on the immediate task that you are doing. Whether it's writing an email, reviewing a document, discussing an assignment with a subordinate. Indeed, I have found that the spirit of attention can actually slow things down. Tennis professionals say that when they are at the top of their game, the ball actually seems to slow down and get bigger. By cultivating a spirit of attention in the present moment, one finds one is more effective at resolving the matter at hand, and this perspective actually creates a positive momentum going forward, so that actually other tasks seem to fall in place. Now, it is said that the difference between an optimist and a pessimist is that pessimists have better information. Now, one cannot afford to be naive, but at the same time, one cannot allow one's anxieties about all the possible things that can go wrong in a day, and some of them will, to completely color one's approach to work. So, just to conclude, my own experience is a spirit of attention can move one from a state of helplessness to one of empowerment. Now, a second benefit relates to professional relationships, and more specifically, the management of people. One of the contradictions of meditation, or as the Zen Buddhists say, one of the koans of meditation, is that while it is a very interior and solitary journey, one of the fruits of that journey is an experience of actually being less absorbed. An experience of being able to place more of one's attention on others. As John Maine said, developing a capacity of other-centeredness. Other-centeredness. Now, in many organizations, including mine, one assumes an executive authority and greater responsibility after having achieved a degree of success as a result of one's technical and intellectual mastery over the relevant subject matter. In my case, the law and the policy of the IMF. Now, to the extent to which you begin to exercise responsibility over other people, one has to move from producing work to producing work through people. That is management. You produce work through people. And this can present a very special challenge. Being confident in one's own capacity of producing work, it is tempting to believe, it was tempting for me to believe, that the only way to ensure high quality work is to continue to do as much of that work as you can. Now, the process of meditation has helped me realize just how flawed that model is. First of all, I have realized that the motivation for micromanagement, while ostensibly that of ensuring high quality, in many ways is just the work of the ego. I have also realized that this approach is really not in the best interests of the institution. Assuming active leadership in all projects effectively stunts the growth of subordinates, making them overly dependent on the manager. Now, it's important to recognize that the solution is not disengagement. It is still important to exercise oversight, and in many cases, over critical details. But what one learns is how to do it in a very different way, with a much lower profile. The key is to move subordinates into much greater responsibility and support them from the background. Each subordinate, not surprisingly, has his or her own strengths and weaknesses, and effective management means managing each one differently. And I found that if done effectively, this approach can actually have a transformational impact on subordinates. They are not only stretched, but they actually feel empowered by the trust you place in them. And I've become to the conclusion that the objective of an effective executive is not to become indispensable, but actually to become as dispensable as possible. But this sort of raises a more general issue that goes beyond just management and is more relevant to the challenge of leadership. Lord Acton, the British historian, observed that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Great men are often bad men. Now, one can think about corruption on a broad level, when where the original wisdom of the leader, indeed the wisdom that resulted in that person obtaining the leadership, is undermined by the inflation of ego that arises once leadership is assumed. Lincoln once noted, "Nearly all men can stand adversity. But if you want to test a man's character, give him power." Lincoln seemed to understand the difference between intelligence and wisdom. Namely, that a wise person fully understands the limits of his own intelligence and has sufficient humility to understand his need or her need of others. His or her need to listen to others. Now, of course, the risk is that a leader not only think that he or she knows it all, but that everyone around him confirms that view out of their own desire to move ahead. And a key sign of a strong leader is one who creates the space for criticism and debate, thereby empowering everybody to question. And of course, people respond to the capacity of a leader to admit mistakes. And as long as the admission is authentic, it's not false modesty, as long as it's a true expression of the leader's humanity, it engenders a relationship of trust. Now, my own experience is that trust is the most important dimension of management. It transcends and is far more important than any management technique. Now, the final benefit of leadership that I want to talk about, and perhaps is the most important, is that of detachment. The word meditation is derived from the Latin phrase, which is statio in medio, which means standing in the center. And the concept of the center has always had tremendous power for me, suggesting both equilibrium but also depth. And meditation for me is a means of being in contact with that center. It is a place beyond your thoughts, beyond your emotions, beyond your ego, beyond your anxieties, a place where you experience yourself as a larger, less fearful, more integrated, and more compassionate person. And the objective is to live your life from that space. And if you can live your life from that center, it has a number, obviously, of professional benefits, but also personal benefits. But let me focus on the professional. Peter talked about the capacity to learn. The more you can detach yourself from your ego, the more open-minded and less defensive you are. In order to learn from your mistakes, you first have to admit that you made one. And I have found that obtaining a degree of detachment from one's ego helps one enormously in this respect. When I am not being driven by my ego and I'm operating from my center, admitting my mistake is no longer as threatening to my own sense of self-worth. I might have made a mistake, but my mistake no longer defines who I am. The second benefit of detachment is greater stability. By becoming rooted in your center, it is easier to avoid being overcome by events. Now, as you've all just found out, meditation is more experiential than conceptual, and sometimes images rather than concepts are more effective in capturing and communicating this process. One image of John Mayne's that I like very much is the idea of dropping anchor. A ship on the ocean is, of course, at the mercy of the surface waters. It finds stability by dropping anchor into the stillness of the deep. And of course, having dropped anchor, we are buffeted by the events of the day, and the anchor becomes dislodged. But the great practicality of meditation, it allows us to self-correct, an opportunity to re-secure the anchor at the end of the day. A book that had tremendous impact on me is a book entitled The Good Heart. And it reports on a conference organized by Lawrence and the world community, I think Peter was there, where the Dalai Lama commented on various passages of the gospel. His commentary on love your enemy from Matthew was extraordinarily instructive for me. While he noted that compassion was clearly an important theme, he emphasized that from a Buddhist perspective, a key message from this text is the benefit of exercising equanimity or detachment. Learning not to go on automatic and react in anger when tried by one's adversary. Learning how to create some space, maintain some perspective when people have revealed their ugliest side to you. He pointed out that equanimity not only gives you greater stability, but gives you the perspective to exercise better judgment and demonstrate greater compassion. Equanimity is not an end in itself. The purpose is not to disengage, but rather to be sufficiently detached to be able to engage consciously rather than unconsciously. In short, how to act rather than to react. Which brings me to the final benefit of detachment, better judgment. Now, when one assumes a leadership position, there is clearly a difference between what is one expected of oneself from the overall process. In my own case, I assumed that I would be asked to continue to provide legal analysis, policy analysis for the institution. But it has become very clear to me that what is expected of me is something else, which is judgment. So what is judgment? It has been said that good judgment is created by experience, and experience comes from the exercise of bad judgment. Now, while it is true that judgment comes from experience, it requires more than that. And I think that Peter put his finger on the issue when he said it requires a certain amount of emotional restraint, emotional intelligence. And this restraint is something that one can access through the detachment that meditation brings. As the Dalai Lama said, once we are no longer being driven by our emotions, we gain an understanding of where others are coming from, an understanding of what the situation really is, not what we would like the situation to be. And this is actually another contradiction of meditation, another koan of meditation. While the objective of meditating is to transcend your thoughts, to actually turn off your mind, one of the benefits of meditation is that it helps one think much more clearly. Our thought process is actually so often driven by our emotions. We think it's thought, but it's actually just emotions being channeled through our thoughts. And the emotional restraint that comes from meditation can actually give our minds far greater clarity. Now, leaders are called upon to exercise judgment in the context of very difficult situations. First, one never has all the information one would like. Events require decisions, even if you would prefer more time. Second, one is often forced to choose among a range of very bad options. Public policy is about alternatives. The counterfactual, what would happen if the other course is followed, is always a key consideration. Sometimes it is very easy to feel very frustrated. Progress is far more incremental than you would like. And sometimes you feel actually that you're not making progress, but the most that you can do is to actually stop things from going backwards. For a policymaker, good judgment comes from understanding the facts as they are, not as how we would like them to be. If the problem is oversimplified, so the solution will be. In my view, a clear recipe for bad policy making is intellectual arrogance. Some of you may have read the 1799 essay on the French Revolution by Edmund Burke, an Irish political philosopher. Irishmen are always very popular in the community. Burke was very critical of the French Revolution, not because he had any love for the Ancien Regime, but because he thought it very foolhardy for a group of people to think that they could successfully recast an entire society from the transformation of a political system to redoing the calendar on the basis of a purely intellectual blueprint that paid no regard to history. In Burke's word, I cannot conceive how any man could have brought himself to the pitch of presumption to consider his country as nothing but carte blanche upon which he could scribble what he pleases. This resonates with my own experience. I am a committed internationalist, and I am convinced that in an interconnected world, global problems require global solutions, even if it means countries sacrificing national sovereignty. Yet over the years, I have learned that progress will only be achieved through careful persuasion and dialogue, based on a sensitivity to the legitimate concerns of all stakeholders, based on a recognition that one does not have all the answers to the problems, and that problems are far more complicated than one would like. And I have accepted, therefore, that progress will be much more incremental than I would like, but that it will not be accelerated by unilateral assertion and intellectual arrogance. If anything, they prove to be counterproductive. So, as Peter has emphasized so well, all leaders need to approach their decision-making responsibility with a degree of humility and the capacity to learn. For public policy makers, the decisions should be based on principles that are formed out of a commitment to serve rather than their ego. They must also take adequate attention to the facts. We need decisions based on principles, not decisions based on ideology. Where decisions are made on the basis of these considerations, they are much easier to take, and my own experience is they are much easier to defend and stand by. I feel compelled to finish on a point that I started on. And even though I've been meditating for a while, I feel like I'm at a very early stage. Like all authentic achievements in life, there are no shortcuts. And this is actually fine. For those of us who are middle-aged and feel at least their physical dimensions in their lives in, well, somewhat of a decline, it is inspiring to know that one has embarked on a journey of spiritual growth. It is something to look forward to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sean. I'd now like to ask Katherine Marshall from the Berkeley Center for her remarks.
Thank you, and I'll try to keep it very brief. I remembered listening to this whole discussion tonight, two vignettes. One was quite recent, in July in Kyoto, Japan. Sulak Sivaraksa, great Buddhist leader, received the Niwano Prize. And there was a great celebration of this. And afterwards, at his press conference, there were a number of questions. And finally, one of the journalists said, "But can you please tell me what we should do about corruption?" And he said, "Meditate." And there was general mirth and a look of great skepticism among the journalists. Second vignette was another spiritual leader, Sri Ravi Shanker, was in the hallowed halls of the World Bank in another part of my life with a large group because the president had invited him, and therefore there was a large group of senior staff. And once again, the issue of corruption came up, and he was asked what the answer was, and he said, "Breathe." And once again, you had a great deal of skepticism. So my main reflection is that the puzzle that links this great wisdom that comes out of thousands of years of tradition and some of the fundamental ethical issues of our time, I think, have been traced by Sean, by Peter, and all of us tonight. So just generally, I think Sean's heartening talk is full of practical, balanced, and thoughtful observations. And it comes from words and ideas, but from the tone he sets and the example he describes. But his talk is also provocative in its implicit challenge to some conventional wisdom, particularly I think about leadership. And he poses important challenges to us all as to how, as individuals and as institutions, we can take ideas from the personal into the public domain. I'm going to comment briefly on three elements that I think he focused on. The first was questions of values, the second on questions of leadership, and the third on discerning excellence and context, the question of wisdom. Several of us spent yesterday evening in Philadelphia, where there was an event with the president of the Ford Foundation and the president of Georgetown University, moderated by George Stephanopoulos and organized by my colleague Tom Banshoff. But the basic theme was values. How can we really come to an understanding of creative values, the tensions between different values? What are values? And it brought home how difficult that discussion is, the discussion of what are values. It can become quickly and very easily rather abstract, and the discussion ran off. There were 10 panelists, and it ran off in those directions constantly. I thought it would be interesting if they could have been here and been forced to reflect on some of the observations here that you have on values, but also on virtues and on qualities. And this sense that was also the purpose at this event in Philadelphia of trying to find a meaningful, shared, and common understanding of purpose and of the sense of the common destiny that we share. So I think Sean's metaphor of the anchor is a very apt one that we're looking for in this discussion, which is a firm anchor in values, but room to move. And I think even to lift the anchor and to shift course. It's about learning and accepting dialogue as a true tool. Again, something I was struck by last night, not a single person in that 10-person panel of extremely exceptional people at any point said, I don't know, or I'd like to ask you something. It's not part of the common discussion, I think. And if we're going to talk about values and understanding each other, having a dialogue, I think those are things that are important. On leadership, I wanted to bring in a different experience that came, because there was so much wisdom that I don't need. As they say, everything has been said, but not everyone has said it. So I won't do that. But we've had an interesting project at the Berkeley Center and the World Faiths Development Dialogue, which was an invitation from the United States Institute of Peace to look at a triad that's very rarely looked at, which is religion, peace, and women. And the reason they asked us to do that is that religion is very often left out of discussions about peace, because there's a common assumption that religion contributes to tension, clash of civilizations, etc. Women have traditionally been left out of peace. It's 2% of peace treaties have women's names on them, and a number of other very dramatic statistics. But when you come to the religious, bringing the religious into peace, the women are simply invisible for reasons that have to do with the pattern of gender within religious hierarchies. So we've explored this and essentially looked at, when you go and look for the women who are working for peace, what do you find? And it's been a fascinating exploration. And one of the first debates among Sister Joan Chittister and Denise Coughlin, and we've interviewed about 60 exceptionally wise women, Scylla Elworthy and so forth, is that first of all, everyone hesitates to essentialize. You know, not all women are the same, not all men are the same. There are warlike women, you've got Joan of Arc, you've got suicide bombers, etc. But there's some interesting qualities that came out of these discussions that echo much of what's been said here today. And clearly the strength of women in many situations of conflict is their ability to see beyond themselves, to see to the community, to be able to put themselves in the shoes of people on the other side, to leave themselves out, to focus on the practical details of getting things done, to heal after pain and after trauma. A whole extraordinary array, and I'm just touching on them, but one of them that I think is an interesting one is which again comes back to the wholeness that I think is part of the message of meditation, is the capacity to draw on different parts of your life and to get away from stereotypes. So in some senses, these models of leadership, of servant leadership, of leadership from behind, have to do with the capacity to put oneself aside, to have a focus on values, to have a focus, as people said in Philadelphia last night, on building a better future, not on myself in the present. And it is certainly not in any way a monopoly of women, but it is a set of distinctive, not unique, characteristics that come out of this study of a group of, in most cases, completely unsung heroines who are contributing in extraordinary ways. And in many ways it contrasts to a book I read some years ago, and that as a leader, when I was in leadership positions, always had me a little puzzled. It's called The Productive Narcissist, which is by a psychologist, not a psychiatrist. But the basic message is that in today's fast-moving, aggressive world, all leaders have to be narcissists. And the key is that they be productive as opposed to unproductive. And so lots of examples of that. The last example that I want to highlight is the discernment and wisdom, because I think we should not ever lose that from our sights, that's a message that comes out of its humility, a sense of being part of history, a sense of being a part of a whole, being able to engage purposefully and with judgment, being open to transformational insight, having this sense, this understanding that trust is far more important than all other management techniques, that decisions are always difficult, that there's never enough information, that the options are not ideal. In this sense, an article that I was reading recently, I commend to everyone here, is by Atul Gawande in the last New Yorker. But it's about coaching, and it's about coaching for himself as a surgeon. And he said he's an outstanding surgeon. But had he reached a plateau? Could he get better? And this sense of the only way to get better is to be able to see yourself through other eyes. And so that is what he did. He got a coach, and he was astonished at what he learned. And he goes through also discussing some of this in teaching and in other professions, taking to a degree the metaphor of athletics and applying it. So I think that you're right, this is a journey. We need to have the courage to be present and also to look to the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katherine. I know it's late and many of you may have to leave, but I don't think we can sacrifice what is often a very, very good part of this kind of an event, which is the conversation with the public. So if we could have questions.
Incredibly interesting presentation. Thank you so much to all the speakers. And thank you for letting me know, Peter. This was incredible. One question I have, you all deal with leaders and business people in different ways. What is a good way to take this message? You talked about education, you talked about taking this to schools, you talked about, teaching it here at Georgetown, all the things that the center is doing. But I find that for the people who are interested, they know about it. People who don't know about it, don't know about it. And one thing that I just learned this morning in conversation is, at the same time, you almost don't want, let's say if in my place of work, I want to discuss this with my colleagues. How do you do this without seeming like you are, going back to the messages you were sharing, you're not being sort of looking at your ego, you're truly wanting to share this. I don't know if you've tried this and how it works.
Sunny, my experience that I don't talk about meditation at my workplace, and I've been practicing this for, as I mentioned, about 23 years. But in recent years, in the last 3 or 4 years, when I offered to speak to my colleagues in the GIC, because I'm now at 63 years old, almost perhaps going into retirement. And a lot of the young people in my company, they want to hear, about my values, about my experience. So I've been doing these town halls for, 50 to 60 people at a time. And I request them to put questions to me. Instead of me telling them what I want them to hear, I said, you let me know what you would like me to talk about. And the very interesting thing is that a lot of the questions they were asking was, tell us about your personal life. We heard that you do meditation. What is that? Tell us about it. And I didn't feel obliged because of the questions put to me that I should then share out of my own experience. So I was sharing with Lawrence and with Sean and others in our community that, in a way, the practice of meditation is not so much promoted as people being attracted to it. I think when you promote something, people get a bit suspicious. What is the agenda? But I think people have a certain insight. Yes, I think this is worthwhile doing. They're attracted to it. They approach you and say, you know, can you tell us about it? So that gives me the opportunity. So that has been the way that I approach it in my own life, in my own organization.
I don't have much to add to that. I think just as you have to be gentle with yourself when you meditate, you also have to be gentle with others when you talk about it. I mean, I have found that when I do talk about it, I do not promote it at all at work, but sometimes it does come up. And I talk about it not in terms of what I think someone should do, but how it has benefited me. And either that resonates with the person or it doesn't. And if it does, that person may pursue the question with me and ask, you know, when did you start meditating? And then to the extent to which there's an interest, I will provide them with materials. I'll put them in touch with Lawrence or whatever. So I completely concur with Peter's approach. I think that it's a very personal experience, and I think you degrade it if you overly market it.
Well, thank you all very, very much. This has been a delightful evening. And I'd just like to, there's Tim Casey, just to say a thanks as director of the Meditation Center.
I'm originally from Los Angeles, and I kind of feel like this is the Academy Awards here, so I'll wrap it up really quickly. As a younger leader, what I see in good leadership, what I would assume, would be the ability to decide, to act, and to be, ultimately. And meditation is learning a way to be. It's often called a way to be. And so what I hear from the apostles up here is an explanation of a way to decide in difficult situations, to implement those actions, and ultimately to be seen and reacted to as a leader. And I think meditation does that. So I'd just like to thank Peter and Sean and Father Lawrence and the rest of the panel, as well as the Berkeley Center and the McDonough School of Business for helping us put on this event. So, and thank you all for coming.